In this video, we're going to elaborate on referencing data in Power BI. We have already discussed that in previous lessons, and we have seen how it works in practice, but there's a few more details that I want to pass before we move forward, so we won't waste time talking about this as we progress. We have been working on calculated columns, and I told you that if we create a new column, for example, if I want to calculate test 1, if I'm going to calculate the sum of the values in the unit price column, I don't have to reference the table. I only have to reference the column name because I'm working in the table itself. The result of my calculation will be returned in the same table as the original columns I'm using in the calculation. So everything will be in the same bucket. So you don't have to reference the table's name. You could do it. You could call it sum of product and unit cost. It's going to work, but you don't have to because it's all in the same bucket. You only need the reference to the column. That's right. But what if we had two tables with the same columns, with the same column names? Okay, let me remove, I will delete this calculated column and back to Power Query. I am going to duplicate this table, the products table. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to call the first one table 1, and the second one table 2. And in table 2, I need something to differentiate both tables. Let's do this. I'm going to keep top rows, keep only 100 rows. And this one has 100 rows, and table 1 has 264 rows. I will close and apply. And there you go. Now I have table 1 and table 2. And you can see that we have the same columns in table 1 and table 2. The column names are the very same. Only the table name is different. Table 1 is different from table 2, but the column names are the same. So what if I try to create, I will click table 1. I'm working in table 1. And what if I try to create a new column and I'm going to call it new column 1. And I'm going to run the same calculation, the sum. In this case, I want to test what happens if I don't reference the table. Now we have two tables. If I don't reference tables, I'm going only to reference the unit cost column and see the sum. The sum is going to be 53,000 and something. And actually, I'm going to copy this and do the same in table 2. Now I'm working in table 2, creating a new column, and I'm going to call it new col 2. And again, I'm not referencing the table name. And there could be some ambiguity, right? Because we are referencing the unit cost column, but there are actually two unit cost columns, one in table 2 and one in table 1, unit cost and unit cost. But Power BI was able to run the calculations, and you can see that the total in this column, in table 2, new column 2, is smaller, it's 40,000, and in table 1, it's 53,000, as table 1 has more rows, so you can imagine that the new column that was created in table 1 actually referenced the right column, which is the unit cost from table 1. And the calculation in table 2, actually, I'm only referencing the column. It correctly selected the data from the unit cost column in the right table, in table 2. So the calculation is right in both tables, even though I never referred the table name, but Power BI is smart enough to find the right table from which I should be getting the data. And this happens because, obviously, when you are working with calculated columns, obviously, the assumption is calculated column is going to be calculated on the columns that are inside the same bucket, the same table. So it makes sense, right? If I try to change, for example, let me in table 1, I will delete it. Now I only have the new column in table 2, but I can't move the new column from table 2 to table 1. If I try to drag it over table 1, it won't work. And actually, it wouldn't work because when you want to do it, you don't do it from the table view, you do it from the model view. And normally, you would take new column 2 and try to drag it over table 1, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work because, yeah, when you're working with calculated columns belong to the table in which they are being created. So there's no way to remove it from there unless you delete it. Hey, a lot of people learn from my videos, but end up forgetting to like and subscribe to the channel. Hitting that like button, subscribing, and leaving a comment really helps YouTube recommend this content to more people, and it lets me know what's working for you. If you'd like to support this project, consider getting the companion datasets for a symbolic price. It's a great way to follow along with the lessons and reinforce your practical skills at the same time. The links are in the description. And let me know in the comments what topics you'd like to see next. I'm always open to new ideas. So you can see that calculated columns, they belong to the table in which they were created. So automatically, Power BI assumes, of course, even though you're not referring any other table, any table at all, it assumes you are getting data from the very same table. And again, you can't move it over another table because, yes, it belongs to the table in which it was created. Of course, if you have a more complex project, a more complex data model, and you have relationships between tables, you could create a new calculated column. And for example, in this case, I'm using table 2. You could create a new calculated column, bringing in data from table 1 or table 3 or any other table that you have in your project. But in this case, you would have to explicitly state what table and what column from that table you're bringing data from. Okay, so in this example, we are using, of course, direct references to columns and not tables. But when you have relationships, and of course, you will have to reference the table, so you can bring in data from other tables in this case. Now let's move forward and see if the same happens with measures. In table 1, I'm going to create a measure, and you can see that when you start creating your measures will be created again in one of the buckets, one of the tables you have in your model. I can create a measure here in table 1, or I will right click the table's name, and I can create it as a new measure in table 2 or table 1. I'm going to start in table 1 and create a new measure, and I will call it total 1, and it's going to be the sum again of in this case, I'm again only going to reference the column, the unit cost column, and there you go. You know that we can only see the result of a measure if we insert it in a visual. In this case, I will have 2 card visuals, and let me bring this measure into the first visual. And I don't want any of these to show numbers in thousands. So the call out value, I don't want to change the units. I want it in units. And okay, and now I just created, you saw that I just created the measure in table 1. I'm actually going to copy this script, and now I'm going to create a new one in table 2, new measure. And the very same, only I'm going to change the measure's name is going to be total 2, and I'm going to bring total 2 into the second card, and you can see that the totals are different. And as table 2 has fewer rows, so you can imagine that the number here would be smaller. So actually, it looks like it's calculating correctly. So measure 1 was able to identify, even though I did not reference the table, only the column, and even though there's 2 unit cost columns, one here in table 1, one here in table 2, it was able to identify and assume that, of course, if I'm referring to the unit cost column and not referencing the table, it makes sense to believe that it's going to be the unit cost column in the same bucket. And measure 2 did the same. Okay, so that looks pretty obvious, but let's do this. I will delete measure 1, and that's a very cool thing. Now I only have measure 2, total 2 in the second table, and of course it assumes it has to use the unit cost column from the same table. What if I drag it over the table, table 1? Like I said, we have to do it from the model view, and let's see, the total here is 40,000, and now I'm moving it over and putting it in table 1. When I go back to the report view, I can see that the total changed because, again, the measure kept the assumption that since I'm not referring to the table, only to the column, it assumes that you are using the unit cost column from the table where it was inserted. In this case, as I moved it from table 2 to table 1, now it rearranged the reference to the unit cost column from the new table in which it was located. But if I used the total reference, for example, it's now in table 1, but if I reference table 2, if I give the function, even though the measure is now living in table 1, once I give it the full path, the full reference to the unit cost column, but now from table 2 instead of table 1, now once I hit enter, it's going to recalculate. And now, even though it's living in table 1, the complete reference will tell Power Query to use the data from the unit cost column from table 2. It all might seem easy and obvious, but when we're working more complex data projects, it could cause confusion. So I just wanted to make sure these references are crystal clear in your mind. And one advice that I would like to give you is rule of thumb. It's just my opinion. I mean, for me, I prefer in both cases, both for calculated columns or measures, I believe it's safer to always use both in calculated columns and measures. It's always safer to use the complete reference to your data. Okay, in a calculated column, I know I will create in table 1, I'm going to create a new column. So I prefer like this. I prefer to give it even though I'm in table 1, myself personally, I prefer the total reference. You don't have to do it. It's just the way I like to work, because I think it's just safer. And this is the way we're going to work from now on. And if you like this video, please don't forget to hit that like button, share this content with your friends, and leave your comments below, comments and questions. And this will also help us a lot grow the channel and help more people. And see you in the next lesson.